Daddy? Daddy?
Welcome to the Twin Lights. I'm the head keeper here, one of many who have kept the lights on over the years. We've seen a lot of history here atop the Navesink Highlands. With the help of a few friends of the Twin Lights, I'm going to take you on a journey along the 200-year timeline that covers the entire story of this remarkable place. The terrible shipwreck you just heard actually had a lot to do with the birth of the Twin Lights. At the end of the Revolutionary War, the leaders of our young nation realized that shipping would be the lifeblood of our young country. The challenge they faced was keeping that shipping safe. The greatest danger to American shipping was not foreign warships or marauding pirates. It was the treacherous Atlantic coastline, and no place was more dangerous than the tricky and unpredictable New Jersey coast. Sailors called it the graveyard of the Atlantic. One mistake in navigation or error in seamanship, and you'd end up on the beach right over there, or high ground of the dreaded Sandy Hook Bar.
As America grew in the early 1800s, so did the need for safe shipping. The War of 1812 taught the United States some hard lessons about the security of its sea coasts. The opening of the Erie Canal in 1825 made New York Harbor a launching pad for westward expansion. Ship traffic off Sandy Hook skyrocketed, and so did the number of shipwrecks. The land-based lighthouse at the tip of Sandy Hook was no longer adequate for safe shipping, nor was the Sandy Hook lightship, located 3 miles offshore. Month after month, great ships were reduced to splinters in the surf along the Jersey shore. With tremendous loss of life and property, New York merchants in the maritime industry demanded that Congress take action. Washington responded by funding a new lighthouse to be built atop the highlands of Navesink. The first lighthouse was built in 1828. It had 2 beacons. It was officially named the Navesink Light Station. Sailors and fellow lighthouse keepers just called it the Twin Lights.
It's been more than a century and a half since ground was broken on the Twin Lights. My fellow keepers have seen a lot of history pass by this spot, and we've been on hand for a lot of history that's been made right here up on the hill. I'm not exactly what you'd call unbiased, but I'd venture to say that there is no other place in New Jersey where you can stand in one spot and feel so connected with the past, present, and future. And on a clear day, the view here is just breathtaking, if I do say so myself.
After spending time at the Twin Lights, visitors to the Smithsonian Institution Castle Building on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. get a funny feeling of déjà vu. There's a good reason for this. By the 1850s, all lighthouse construction was overseen by the U.S. Lighthouse Board in Washington. The chairman and chief scientists of the board, Joseph Totten and Joseph Henry, were also involved in the building of, you guessed it, the Smithsonian. Did Totten and Henry do a little arm twisting in their meetings with the Twin Lights architect? Officially, we may never know, but it's hard to ignore the imposing fortress architecture and castle turrets shared by both historic structures.
When human life is at stake, you can never be too careful. Prior to the 1828 Twin Lights, there were already the two single beacons in the area, the lighthouse at the tip of Sandy Hook and the Sandy Hook lightship. So as not to confuse sailors, the new facility was built on this hill with two beacons 320 feet apart. The concept of twin lights was not unique. Throughout the history of the U.S. Lighthouse Service, there were actually 7 sets of twin lights, and even 1 set of triple lights.
After the original Twin Lights fell into disrepair, a replacement lighthouse was constructed in 1862. It also featured 2 towers. The new towers were 228 feet apart. They fit neatly inside the footprint of the old towers. The old lights shone until the new ones were ready to take their place. The old towers were then demolished. The south tower of the new lighthouse had a powerful Fresnel lens. The glow from the light carried over the horizon on a clear night to a distance of 70 miles. The north tower had a less powerful Fresnel lens. On stormy nights, the beams from these 2 lenses were a welcome sight for incoming ships. When ship captains saw the 2 lights, they knew they were getting close to the treacherous shoals off Sandy Hook. It meant it was time to alter course to starboard, or hang a right, and head toward the relative safety of the Sandy Hook Channel.
I'm Lieutenant Commander Chuck Gullidge, United States Coast Guard Reserve, retired. I'm standing on the grounds of the Twin Lights overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, Sandy Hook, and Sandy Hook Bay. Early in my Coast Guard career, I was stationed at Coast Guard Station Sandy Hook, which is located about 6 miles to the north directly behind me. Ships that ignored the danger of transiting the Jersey Shore and Sandy Hook Channel did so at great peril, especially at night and during violent nor'easter storms common to this area. Many a vessel crossed the Atlantic only to end up smashed to bits in the surf right here off Sandy Hook in a terrifying storm. To this day, there are still vestiges of wrecked ships just offshore that were lost in storms or collisions at sea. The United States Life-Saving Service, one of the predecessors of the Coast Guard, began on Sandy Hook at the Spermaceti Cove Life-Saving Station in 1849. The service grew to become world famous for pulling shipwrecked mariners safely ashore before they were overcome by the sea. Incidentally, in 1939, the United States Lighthouse Service also became part of the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard life-saving tradition under the Department of Homeland Security continues today. Their motto is Semper Paratus, always ready.
The light from the Fresnel lens on display here in our generator building was the most powerful in the United States. It produced 25 million candle power. There is a famous story about how the light was so powerful that cows on the farms in the surrounding area would not produce milk because the bright light kept them up all night. There was a problem with the light shining 360 degrees around the tower, illuminating the farms and homes in the area all night long. It is probably one of the first documented cases of light pollution in New Jersey. However, we know from the Twin Lights logbook the real issue was that the light was bothering several influential and politically connected residents who lived in homes behind the lighthouse. As it turns out, the solution was relatively easy. The keepers replaced a few glass panes with metal panels in the back of both lens rooms. The blanked-out panels in both towers remain today.
When you stand in front of the Twin Lights' massive Fresnel lens in the generator building, you are literally basking in the history of devices you now depend on every day. The Fresnel lens marked a turning point in the science of optics. It helped spark a scientific revolution that led to everything from checkout scanners and camera lenses to solar collectors and fiber optic cables. A day rarely passes when you are not benefiting from technology, that was advanced by the type of lenses first used in the United States at the Twin Lights.
Where would we be without these little miracles? While on the topic of technology, did you know that almost all of the devices keeping you connected to the world, including cell phones and GPS, are based on wireless technology that was developed right here at the Twin Lights?
In the autumn of 1899, an Italian scientist named Guglielmo Marconi set out to demonstrate how wireless communication would change the world. Marconi was the Bill Gates of his day, just 25 years old and already full of amazing ideas. His dream was to, as he put it, signal through space without wires. And that's just what he did.
My name is Gioia Marconi Braga, and Guglielmo Marconi, the inventor of the wireless telegraph, was my father. My father was invited to America by James Gordon Bennett, the proprietor of the New York Herald newspaper, to publicize the 1899 America's Cup races while demonstrating the practical uses of wireless telegraphy. The contenders in the race were the British yacht Shamrock, owned by Sir Thomas Lipton of Lipton Tea fame, and the American yacht Columbia II, owned by financier J.P. Morgan.
I'm Bob Lucky. I'm chairman of the Marconi Society. I'm a local resident who spent a lot of years at Bell Labs Research. To us and to the history of communication, this is an important site where I'm standing right now, because it was right here that in 1899, Marconi sent the first radio signals in America.
Within a few years, a wireless telegraph known simply as a Marconi was required on all seagoing ships and was responsible for saving many lives at sea, including the 705 survivors of the Titanic. Marconi was a national hero. Barely 2.5 years later, Father reached perhaps the crowning point of his career, the successful transmission of a wireless signal from England to America. A feat that prompted Thomas Edison to remark, "I would like to meet that young man who had the monumental audacity to attempt and to succeed in jumping an electrical wave across the Atlantic." What other men had been content to prove impossible, he accomplished, and this is truly greatness. The history of wireless communication has been a history of miracles. To Marconi's vision and perseverance, we owe the immeasurable benefits of radio and all that stems from it.
My name is Lieutenant Paul Taylor with the 245th Coast Artillery on Sandy Hook. About 40 years after Marconi's groundbreaking wireless experiments, the U.S. military came to Twin Lights. Their mission was to test something everyone was calling a mystery ray. As you can see from this newspaper headline, the secret experiments weren't a very well-kept secret. Later, the mystery was solved. These were the first American radar experiments. The progress made at Twin Lights by this massive radar array jump-started a technology that changed the course of history. Within a few years, America was fighting in World War II. The radar program tested at Twin Lights saved countless thousands of lives and was in many ways the difference between victory and defeat. If the Twin Lights radar looks familiar, you may have seen something similar to it in the movie Pearl Harbor. This was the same radar that detected the Japanese attack on Hawaii in 1941, but the technology then was so new that the attacking planes went unrecognized. Later, the same radar technology developed here was downscaled so dramatically that it could fit in the head of an anti-aircraft shell. These shells were used to bring down kamikazes in the waning days of the war in the Pacific. The trend of smaller, smarter, and faster is a lot older than you might think.
The next time you use your cell phone or laptop at the Twin Lights, take a moment to appreciate how far wireless communication has come. You could be standing on the very spot where Marconi stood while contemplating how to best demonstrate the first practical application of wireless communications in America. How will we send and receive information a century from now? The answer is as intriguing to us now as the idea of cell phones must have been to the people who watched these incredible experiments at the Twin Lights more than a century ago.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
On the morning of April 25, 1893, a large crowd gathered at the Twin Lights to kick off the biggest patriotic event in generations. On this spot, the Pledge of Allegiance was publicly recited as America's oath of loyalty for the very first time. Just offshore, an international flotilla of warships sailed by during the ceremony and fired a salute. As the pledge was read aloud and the American flag was raised atop the Liberty Pole.
It was 135 feet high, twice the height of the towers. Looking up at the Twin Lights today, it is difficult to imagine how it must have appeared. Its scale was simply fantastic. The Liberty Pole was so tall that the cameras of the day were unable to keep it in the same frame as the Twin Lights. The Liberty Pole was the brainchild of William McDowell, a Newark businessman who was fiercely patriotic. McDowell thought that people coming to America should be greeted by an enormous flag that conveyed the grandeur of the growing country. He wanted it to be the first thing they saw, and he believed that the Twin Lights was the perfect place for it.
McDowell began working with the Youth's Companion, the top-selling young people's publication in the 1890s. Francis Bellamy wrote the Pledge of Allegiance for the Youth's Companion, and during 1892, it became very popular among teachers and schoolchildren. President Benjamin Harrison thought it would make a fine national oath. His successor, Grover Cleveland, carried this idea into 1893. That year, President Cleveland ordered a great international naval review in New York Harbor to coincide with the opening of the Chicago World's Fair, where the United States would flex its economic muscles before an international audience for the first time. The first event in this three-day patriotic celebration was the official reciting of the Pledge of Allegiance here at the Twin Lights. It was quite an occasion. A new peace flag was even designed to be raised for special celebrations. Imagine, all those times you've uttered the pledge, you were connecting with history, made here, back on that unforgettable April day. Did you know that 1 in 3 Americans can trace their heritage back to Ellis Island? Starting in 1892, more than 12 million immigrants entered the U.S. through Ellis Island to begin their new lives. For almost all of them, their first glimpse of the continental United States was the Twin Lights. The actual number of Americans whose ancestors sailed past the Twin Lights is far greater than the figure we get from Ellis Island. For 35 years before Ellis Island opened, 8 million immigrants followed the same route, only to Manhattan's busy piers, where they were processed at the Castle Garden Immigration Depot. Castle Garden was located near Battery Park in Manhattan.
When you've been around as long as the Twin Lights have, the line between fact and fiction can get blurred. Take our mystery cannon. It's the most popular photo spot up here on the hill, and it's probably the most photographed cannon in the state. Until recently, that's all we could say about it for sure. But now we know more.
The Twin Lights cannon once belonged to a pirate ship. That would be false. Although it's very possible that it fired a shot or two a pirate's way, the initials inscribed on the side of the cannon helped us trace it back to the Aaron Lopez family of Rhode Island in the 1700s. Aaron Lopez was a merchant who operated a fleet of ships out of Newport. The J in the inscription on the cannon probably stands for Joseph, his son, who was born in 1756. We now think the mystery cannon came off a boat called the Snow Joseph, which met its doom somewhere off Sandy Hook. If you look at the dings and pitting on the cannon, it's clear that it spent months or even years rolling around in the surf. The Fresnel lens in the generator house was once held captive in Boston. True. The twin lights was decommissioned in 1949, and the second-order Fresnel lens in the South Tower was disassembled and stored in the U.S. Coast Guard Lighthouse Depot in Staten Island. The lens was later loaned to the Boston Museum of Science, where it was placed on display. In 1979, a delegation from the Twin Lights Historical Society journeyed to Boston to free the historic lens and bring it home to New Jersey. The Museum of Science graciously agreed. The current twin lights are identical twins. False. The original 1828 twin lights were identical. However, in the 1862 design, the North Tower is octagonal with 8 sides, and the South Tower is square with 4 sides. Thousands of people visit the twin lights every month and don't realize it. On your next visit, see for yourself. The Twin Lights was a front-row seat for a world-famous sports event. True. From the 1870s through the 1920s, the America's Cup was held in the waters directly in front of the Twin Lights. Many spectators boarded ships to watch the race from the water. Others made their way to the Twin Lights, where they enjoyed a magnificent view of the competition. In the years when the Liberty Pole was standing, the competitors' colors were raised to the top, where they could be seen from the ocean. The New York Yacht Club was unbeaten in the America's Cup from 1870 to 1983. That is still the longest winning streak in the history of sports. The life of a lighthouse keeper was one of loneliness and solitude.
In this case, both true and false. Keepers who worked at isolated island lighthouses typically spent weeks away from friends and loved ones. These are the lonely men we often think about when we imagine old-time lighthouse keepers. The truth is that many keepers actually enjoyed that lifestyle. It was a very different story at the Twin Lights. Some of the Twin Lights keepers lived here for a decade or more. They raised families and became integral parts of the community. At the Twin Lights, there was a principal keeper and his family, along with 3 to 4 assistant keepers and their families. The keeper's quarters, which is located between the 2 towers, next to the Twin Lights Museum, may not have been a typical home, but we know from photos and written accounts the families left behind that they lived normal, happy lives up here on the hill.
People have been coming to the Twin Lights to get connected for more than a century. The Twin Lights National Historic Site is one of the most visited lighthouses in the world. Since 2000, more than 1 million people have climbed the North Tower and visited the museum. Even the adventure of getting here gets you connected. Long before you reach the top of the tower, you'll be retracing the steps of millions of people who have made a day out of visiting the Twin Lights.
Back in my time, we'd get a handful of curiosity seekers up here every now and then, but nothing like today. More than 100,000 people visit the Twin Lights every year. They come for the view. They come for the museum. They come to climb the tower. And they come to
get connected.
Get connected.
Get connected.
Get connected.
get connected.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.